Teacher flees killer with blood on her hands, crashes into billionaire who becomes her salvation. Shania's hands shook as she pressed against the penthouse elevator buttons, blood still wet on her blouse from the murder she'd witnessed. The doors opened to reveal a man in a tailored suit, and her student Eloise's father. "Miss Fontaine?" Kevin Bramwell's voice was sharp with confusion. "What are you doing in my—" His eyes dropped to the crimson stains. "Whose blood is that?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Shania's mind raced as she stared into those intense green eyes she'd seen only briefly during parent-teacher conferences. Kevin Bramwell stood frozen in his marble-floored foyer, his 6'3" frame filling the doorway with an authority that made her feel even smaller than her current circumstances already did. She began, then stopped. How do you explain to a man you barely know that you've just watched someone die, that you're running for your life, that his penthouse elevator was your random escape route from hell? Kevin stepped forward, his businessman's instincts taking over. The blood wasn't hers. He could see that much from her steady stance and clear eyes, despite the terror written across her beautiful face. This was Eloise's beloved teacher, the woman his 8-year-old daughter spoke about with starlight in her voice every single day after school. "Come inside," he said, his voice gentler now. "Whatever happened, you're safe here." Safe. The word almost made Shania laugh hysterically. She hadn't felt safe since 8:47 p.m., when she'd seen Victor Carrillo plunge a knife into his business partner's chest in the parking garage beneath this very building. She'd been leaving her evening tutoring session, walking to her car with her mind on tomorrow's lesson plans, when she'd heard the shouting. She should have kept walking, should have minded her own business. Instead, she'd hidden behind a concrete pillar and watched a man she recognized from local news, a wealthy businessman with political connections, commit cold-blooded murder. "Miss Fontaine?" Kevin's voice brought her back to the present. He was studying her with those sharp eyes, taking in every detail. The way her usually perfect hair hung loose around her shoulders. The way her professional blouse was stained not just with blood, but with her own tears. The way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. "I witnessed a murder," she said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "In the parking garage downstairs, Victor Carrillo killed his business partner, and I saw everything." Kevin's expression changed instantly. The concern remained, but now it was layered with something harder, more dangerous. He knew that name. Victor Carrillo wasn't just any businessman. He was Kevin's competitor, a man who'd tried to buy out Kevin's company through increasingly aggressive tactics over the past year. "You're sure it was Carrillo?" Kevin asked, already reaching for his phone. "Positive. I've seen his face on the news enough times." Shania's voice cracked slightly. "He saw me, Mr. Bramwell. He looked right at me when I gasped. I ran to the elevator and just pressed buttons, and somehow I ended up here and—" "Breathe," Kevin commanded softly, stepping closer. "You're safe now. I promise you that." There it was again. That word. Safe. Coming from him, from a man whose presence filled the entire space with quiet power, it almost sounded believable. Kevin was already dialing his head of security. "Elias, I need you here now. We have a situation." He paused, his eyes never leaving Shania's face. "And call Detective Balderas. Tell her we have a witness to the Carrillo investigation." As he spoke, Shania found herself really looking at him for the first time. She'd seen him briefly at school events, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by an aura of success and control. But here, in his private space, she could see beyond the billionaire facade. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His green eyes held a depth of pain that spoke of someone who understood loss. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt something shift in the air between them. "Daddy?" A small voice interrupted the charged moment. "Is that Miss Fontaine?" Eloise Bramwell appeared at the top of the curved staircase, her dark curls bouncing as she hurried down in her pink pajamas. Her face lit up with pure joy when she saw her teacher standing in their living room. "Miss Fontaine! Daddy, it's really Miss Fontaine! Are you having a sleepover? Are you going to live with us now? I told all my friends you'd be the perfect mommy and—" "Eloise, sweetheart, slow down." Kevin's voice was warm with affection for his daughter, but Shania caught the way his jaw tightened at the word mommy. Miss Fontaine is just visiting for a little while. The child bounced over to Shania, completely oblivious to the blood on her teacher's clothes or the tension crackling between the adults. This is so exciting. Wait until I tell Madison that my teacher came to my house. Shania knelt down to Eloise's level, forcing herself to smile despite everything. This child was her anchor to normalcy, a reminder of why she did what she did every day. Hi, sweetheart. You should be sleeping. I heard voices, Eloise explained, then studied Shania's face with the piercing honesty only children possess. You look sad, Miss Fontaine. Are you okay? Before Shania could answer, the penthouse elevator chimed again. Kevin moved protectively in front of both Shania and Eloise as the doors opened to reveal a man in his 40s with the alert posture of former military. Elias Webb, head of security, the man introduced himself to Shania with a nod. Mr. Bramwell filled me in on the basics. We need to get you cleaned up and take your statement before Detective Balderas arrives. Kevin placed a gentle hand on Shania's shoulder, and she felt warmth spread through her entire body from that simple touch. Renata laid out some clean clothes in the guest room upstairs. Take your time. We'll be right here when you're ready. As Shania headed upstairs, she could hear Eloise's excited chatter behind her. Daddy, can Miss Fontaine stay forever? She could teach me reading every day and make pancakes and... Eloise, that's enough questions for tonight. Kevin's voice was patient but firm. Miss Fontaine needs some quiet time. In the luxurious guest bathroom, Shania stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, hair wild, eyes wide with shock, designer blouse ruined with evidence of violence. She stripped off the stained clothing and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the physical evidence of the worst night of her life. But as she stood there, she couldn't shake the memory of how Kevin had looked at her. There had been concern, yes, and protective instincts, but there had been something else too, something that made her pulse quicken, despite the trauma of the evening. She was Eloise's teacher. He was a billionaire single father. She had no business noticing how his hand had lingered on her shoulder, or how his voice had gone softer when he'd promised her safety. She had no business thinking about the way his presence made her feel both vulnerable and protected at the same time. Downstairs, Kevin was having similar thoughts as he watched Elias coordinate with building security to review surveillance footage. He couldn't stop thinking about how small Shania had looked standing in his foyer, how brave she'd been despite her fear. This was the woman Eloise talked about constantly, the teacher who made learning magical and always had time for every student. The parking garage cameras caught everything, Elias reported. Carrillo definitely saw her. We need to assume he'll try to find her. Kevin's jaw tightened. How long until Detective Balderas gets here? 20 minutes. I've also contacted the FBI. Carrillo's been on their radar for money laundering and racketeering. This murder charge might be exactly what they need to bring him down. And Miss Fontaine's safety? This building is fortress-level secure, but if Carrillo has the right connections... Elias paused meaningfully. She can't go home tonight, maybe not for several days. Kevin nodded grimly. He'd suspected as much, which meant Shania Fontaine, the woman who made his daughter's face light up every morning, the woman whose dedication to her students had impressed him during every brief school interaction, would be staying in his home under his protection. The thought should have been purely practical. Instead, he found himself remembering the way she'd looked at him when he'd promised her safety, the way something had shifted in her warm brown eyes, as if she were seeing him as more than just a parent or a wealthy businessman. Daddy? Eloise appeared beside him, having changed into her favorite purple pajamas. Is Miss Fontaine going to be okay? She seemed really scared. Kevin pulled his daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Miss Fontaine is very brave, sweetheart. She did the right thing, and now we're going to make sure she stays safe. Good, Eloise said decisively. I don't want anything bad to happen to her. She's the best teacher in the whole world, and she always makes me feel special. Out of the mouths of babes, Kevin looked down at his daughter, this beautiful, innocent child who had been asking for a mother figure for the past year, and felt something shift in his chest. Eloise had never reacted to any woman the way she reacted to Shania Fontaine, and if he was being honest with himself, neither had he. When Shania came back downstairs 20 minutes later, Kevin felt his breath catch. She was wearing one of Renata's casual dresses, a simple navy blue wrap dress that hugged her curves and brought out the warmth in her brown skin. Her hair was still damp, falling in natural waves around her shoulders, and without the professional armor of her work clothes, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more beautiful. "The clothes fit perfectly," she said softly, her fingers nervously smoothing the fabric. "Please thank Renata for me." "You can thank her yourself in the morning," Kevin replied, then realized what he'd implied. "I mean, if you're comfortable staying here tonight, Elias thinks it's the safest option." Before Shania could respond, Detective Camilla Balderas arrived with 2 FBI agents. For the next 2 hours, Shania recounted every detail of what she'd witnessed, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. Kevin found himself watching her with growing admiration. This woman had witnessed something traumatic, but she was determined to see justice done. "We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial," Detective Balderas explained as they wrapped up. "But that could be weeks or months away. In the meantime, Carrillo's lawyers will do everything they can to discredit you or worse, silence you permanently." "What does that mean for Miss Fontaine's safety?" Kevin asked, his protective instincts flaring. "It means she needs to disappear for a while. New identity, safe house, the works." The detective looked apologetic. "I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "No," Kevin's voice was firm. "She stays here." Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Shania's eyes widened in surprise. "Kevin, I appreciate the offer, but I can't ask you to," she began. "You're not asking. I'm insisting." Kevin's tone brooked no argument. "This building has better security than most government facilities. My team is ex-military and completely trustworthy. And," he paused, his eyes meeting hers, "Eloise would never forgive me if I let anything happen to her favorite teacher." Detective Balderas looked between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents in the room. "It's unorthodox, but actually not a bad solution. Carrillo would never think to look for her in the home of his business rival." "It's settled then," Kevin said, and Shania felt that shift in the air again, that sense that her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. As the law enforcement officials left, Eloise reappeared with an armload of books. "Miss Fontaine, since you're staying, can you read me a bedtime story?" "Daddy tries, but he does all the voices wrong." Kevin looked offended. "I'll have you know my dragon voice is very good." "It sounds like you have a stomach ache," Eloise giggled, and Shania found herself smiling for the first time since the nightmare began. "I'd love to read you a story, sweetheart," she said, settling onto the couch with Eloise curled up beside her. As Shania read about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, Kevin found himself watching from the doorway. The sight of his daughter snuggled against her teacher, both of them bathed in the warm glow of the fireplace, created an ache in his chest he hadn't felt in years. This was what a family looked like. This was what he'd been missing since his wife died, what he'd been too afraid to hope for again. When the story ended and Eloise was sleepy enough to be carried to bed, Kevin lifted his daughter easily. "Say goodnight to Miss Fontaine, sweetheart." "Good night, Miss Fontaine," Eloise mumbled against his shoulder. "I'm so happy you're here. Will you still be here when I wake up?" Shania met Kevin's eyes over his daughter's head, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with safety or convenience, and everything to do with the way her heart was suddenly racing. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be here." After Kevin tucked Eloise into bed, he found Shania standing on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. The cool night air stirred her hair, and in the moonlight, she looked like something out of a dream. "Thank you," she said when he joined her, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me." Kevin moved closer, close enough to catch the scent of Renata's vanilla shampoo in her hair. "What you did tonight, witnessing that murder, agreeing to testify, that took incredible courage." Shania turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing only inches apart. In the dim light, his green eyes looked almost black, intense and searching. "I don't feel courageous," she whispered. "I feel terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Kevin said softly, his hand lifting to gently cup her cheek. "It's doing the right thing despite the fear." The touch of his fingers against her skin sent electricity through her entire body. This was wrong, she told herself. He was Eloise's father, a man so far out of her league it was laughable. She was an elementary school teacher from a working-class family, and he was a billionaire who could have any woman he wanted. But when he looked at her like that, as if she were something precious and rare, all of her rational thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. "Kevin," she breathed, not even sure what she was asking for. He heard it anyway, that note of longing in her voice that matched something deep in his own chest. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and he watched her eyes flutter closed at the touch. "I know this is complicated," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "I know the timing is impossible and the circumstances are—" "Daddy?" Eloise's voice from inside made them both freeze. "I had a bad dream." Kevin dropped his hand and stepped back, but not before Shania saw the flash of regret in his eyes. The moment was broken, but the awareness between them remained, crackling like a live wire. "Coming, sweetheart," Kevin called, then looked back at Shania. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be complicated enough." As he headed inside to comfort his daughter, Shania remained on the terrace, her fingertips pressed to her cheek where his touch still lingered. Everything about this situation was dangerous. Not just Victor Carrillo and his threats, but the way Kevin Bramwell made her feel things she had no business feeling. But as she listened to his deep voice soothing Eloise's fears through the open door, she realized the danger might be worth it. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she might have found something, someone, worth taking a risk for. Have you ever found yourself in a dangerous situation where a stranger became your unexpected protector? Tell me about that moment in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if Kevin's protective instincts are already making your heart race. Inside the penthouse, as Kevin smoothed Eloise's covers and whispered reassurances about monster-free bedrooms, his mind kept drifting to the woman in his guest room. Shania Fontaine had entered his life like a storm, sudden, powerful, and impossible to ignore. The next morning brought a new set of challenges. Kevin woke early, as he always did, and found Shania already in the kitchen with Renata, helping prepare breakfast. She wore a simple white blouse and dark pants, clothes Renata had somehow procured overnight, and her hair was pulled back in her usual professional style. But Kevin could see past the composed exterior to the uncertainty in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured orange juice. "Good morning," he said, and watched her startled reaction to his voice. Even after a night's sleep, the awareness between them was still there, simmering beneath the surface of politeness. "Good morning, Mr. Bramwell. I hope you don't mind that I—" "Kevin," he corrected gently. "If you're staying in my home, the least you can do is use my first name." Before she could respond, Eloise bounded into the kitchen like a small hurricane, her school uniform half-buttoned and her backpack dragging behind her. "Miss Fontaine, you're really still here. This is the best day ever." She launched herself at her teacher, who caught her in a warm hug that made Kevin's chest tight with unnamed emotion. "Good morning, sweetheart," Shania laughed, straightening Eloise's collar with the automatic care of someone who'd spent years with children. "Let's get you properly dressed for school." As Shania helped his daughter finish getting ready, Kevin found himself watching their interaction with growing fascination. Eloise was completely transformed around her teacher, calmer, more confident, more willing to follow directions. It was clear that Shania had a gift for connecting with children that went far beyond classroom management. "Miss Fontaine, will you walk me to school today?" Eloise asked hopefully. "I want to show you my favorite spot in the courtyard." Kevin saw Shania's face fall slightly before she composed herself. "Actually, sweetheart, I won't be going to school for a few days. I'm taking a little vacation." "But who's going to teach my class?" Eloise's voice rose with concern. "What if the substitute doesn't know about my reading group? What if they give us too much homework?" "The substitute will take very good care of everyone," Shania assured her, but Kevin could hear the pain in her voice. This woman loved her job, loved her students, and being forced away from them was clearly tearing her apart. After Eloise left for school with her usual driver, the penthouse felt strangely empty. Kevin should have gone to his office, should have lost himself in the familiar world of business deals and corporate strategy. Instead, he found himself lingering over coffee, watching Shania stare out the windows with a lost expression. "You're thinking about your students," he said. She nodded, not turning around. 26 third graders who don't understand why their teacher suddenly disappeared. I've worked so hard to build trust with them, to make them feel safe and valued, and now—" She trailed off, her shoulders sagging. Kevin set down his coffee cup and moved to stand beside her. You're protecting them by staying away. If Carrillo thought he could use your students to get to you. I know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. That doesn't make it any easier. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the city below. Kevin found himself studying her profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way the morning light brought out golden undertones in her dark skin. Tell me about them, he said suddenly. Your students. Shania turned to look at him in surprise. What? Your students. Tell me about them. What makes each one special? For the next hour, Kevin listened as Shania described her class with the passionate detail of someone who truly cared about each individual child. She told him about Marcus, who struggled with reading but had an incredible talent for storytelling. About Sophia, whose parents didn't speak English but who was determined to become a doctor. About James, who acted out because his father had left and who just needed someone to believe in him. As she spoke, her whole face lit up with purpose and joy. Kevin found himself captivated not just by her beauty, but by the depth of her compassion, the way she saw potential in every child who walked into her classroom. You're an extraordinary teacher, he said when she finished, and meant it. Shania ducked her head, clearly uncomfortable with the compliment. I just try to see each kid for who they really are, not who the world tells them they should be. The simple statement hit Kevin like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had tried to see him for who he really was? Behind the billions and the business empire and the carefully constructed public image, he was just a man who missed his wife, who worried constantly about being a good father, who sometimes felt crushingly lonely despite being surrounded by people all day long. Before he could examine that thought too closely, his phone rang. It was Elias with security updates that required his attention, but as Kevin listened to reports about potential threats and protection protocols, part of his mind remained focused on the woman standing across the room and the way she had looked at him when he'd called her extraordinary. The rest of the morning passed in a strange domestic rhythm. Kevin worked from his home office while Shania explored the penthouse library, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence. When they passed in the hallway or reached for the same book, accidental touches sent sparks through both of them. Around noon, Elias returned with concerning news. Carrillo's lawyers are already working to discredit Miss Fontaine's testimony. They're digging into her background, her finances, looking for anything they can use against her. Kevin felt his protective instincts flare. What kind of things? Student loan debt, a few late credit card payments from when she was in graduate school, an ex-boyfriend who might be willing to say negative things about her character. Elias's expression was grim. Standard character assassination tactics. Shania, who had joined them for the briefing, went pale. They're going to destroy my reputation, aren't they? My career, my life. No, Kevin's voice was steel. They're not. Both Shania and Elias looked at him in surprise. I'll handle the financial issues, Kevin continued, his mind already working through possibilities. Anonymous payments to clear her debts, make sure her finances are spotless, and as for character witnesses... Kevin, no. Shania's voice was firm. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I won't let you buy my problems away. That's not who I am. Her fierce independence should have been frustrating. Instead, Kevin found it incredibly attractive. Here was a woman who couldn't be bought, who valued her integrity over comfort or convenience. Then what do you suggest? He asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. I face it head on. I tell the truth about my background, my struggles, my choices. I let my actions speak for themselves. Shania's chin lifted with quiet dignity. I've never been ashamed of where I come from or how hard I've had to work. I'm not going to start now. Elias looked impressed despite himself. That's actually not a bad strategy. Juries respond well to authentic testimony. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Principal Hargrave, looking harried and anxious as Renata showed him into the living room. Miss Fontaine, he began without preamble. The district office is asking questions. Parents are concerned. I need to know when you'll be returning to your classroom. Kevin watched Shania's face carefully as she explained the situation in general terms, not mentioning the specifics of the case. Principal Hargrave's expression grew more troubled with each word. "This is highly irregular," he said finally. "I understand you're in some kind of legal situation, but my first responsibility is to the students and their families. If you can't provide a definite return date, are you threatening her job?" Kevin's voice was deceptively calm, but Shania could hear the dangerous undertone. Principal Hargrave seemed to notice Kevin for the first time, taking in the expensive suit, the aura of power and wealth. "Mr. Bramwell, Kevin Bramwell, Eloise is in Miss Fontaine's class." Kevin's tone didn't warm. "And I'm very interested in your answer to my question." The principal's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Of course not. Miss Fontaine is an exemplary teacher. It's just that in situations like this, the district has policies." "I'm sure the district also has policies about supporting teachers who are cooperating with federal law enforcement," Kevin said smoothly. "I'd hate for Miss Fontaine's situation to become a media story about how the school district failed to protect a teacher who was helping to bring a dangerous criminal to justice." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Principal Hargrave quickly backtracked, assuring them that Shania's job would be waiting for her whenever she was able to return. After he left, Shania turned to Kevin with a mixture of gratitude and frustration. "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, I did." Kevin's voice was firm. "You're under my protection now, Shania. That means I don't let anyone, not Carrillo, not lawyers, not even your own principal, threaten what matters to you." The way he said her name, with that slight roughness that spoke of barely controlled emotion, made her breath catch. There it was again, that awareness crackling between them like electricity before a storm. "Kevin," she said softly, and he took a step closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. They were standing in the middle of his living room, afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Kevin found himself memorizing everything about this moment. The way Shania's eyes went wide and dark when he moved closer, the way she unconsciously moistened her lips, the way she didn't step back, even though they both knew this was dangerous territory. "I should be working," he said, but made no move to leave. "You should be," she agreed, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Kevin raised his hand to cup her face, just as he had the night before on the terrace, and watched her eyes flutter closed at the contact. This time, there was no interruption, no small voice calling from another room. Just the two of them, and the desire that had been building since she'd stepped off that elevator with blood on her blouse and fear in her eyes. "This is crazy," Shania breathed, but she leaned into his touch anyway. "Completely insane," Kevin agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "You're Eloise's teacher. You're under my protection. This is the last thing either of us needs right now." "The very last thing," she whispered, but her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. Kevin leaned closer, close enough that he could feel her breath against his lips, close enough to see the golden flecks in her brown eyes. "Shania," he murmured, and it was both a question and a prayer. Her answer was to rise up on her toes and close the last few inches between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft and tentative and absolutely perfect. Kevin felt something fundamental shift inside his chest as he kissed her back, his arms coming around her waist to pull her closer. She tasted like coffee and hope and something uniquely her own, and he wanted to memorize every second of this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kevin rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Shania nodded, her hands still pressed against his chest. "I know. I don't do casual, Shania. I can't. Not with Eloise to think about, and not with—" He paused, struggling to find words for emotions he'd kept locked away for years. "Not with you." "I don't do casual either," she whispered. "But Kevin, this situation, what we're both dealing with, I know." His arms tightened around her slightly, as if he could protect her from reality itself. "I know all the reasons this is complicated. I know all the reasons we should walk away right now and pretend this never happened. But you're not walking away." "No." His voice was rough with honesty. "I'm not walking away. Are you?" Shania looked up into his eyes, seeing not the intimidating billionaire or the powerful businessman, but simply a man who was looking at her like she was something precious and rare. A man who made her feel seen and valued in ways she'd never experienced before. "No," she said finally. "I'm not." walking away either. Chapter 2. The next few days settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and intensely charged. Kevin worked from home, claiming it was for security reasons, but both he and Shania knew the real reason was the magnetic pull between them that neither could ignore. Every morning, they shared breakfast while Eloise chattered excitedly about having her favorite teacher living in their house. Every evening, they read bedtime stories together, Kevin and Shania sitting on opposite sides of Eloise's bed like the picture of domestic harmony. But it was the moments in between, the accidental touches in the hallway, the lingering glances across the dinner table, the way Kevin's hand would brush against Shania's when they reached for the same book, that were slowly driving them both to the edge of sanity. On Thursday morning, Shania was helping Eloise with her online schoolwork when the little girl made an observation that stopped both adults in their tracks. "Daddy smiles different now," Eloise announced, looking up from her math worksheet. "He smiles with his eyes now, like you do, Miss Fontaine." Kevin, who was working at his laptop nearby, felt his breath catch. Out of the mouths of babes indeed. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Shania asked gently, though she could feel Kevin's intense gaze on her from across the room. "Before, Daddy's smiles were just with his mouth," Eloise explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "But now they're like sunshine smiles, the kind that make you feel warm inside." Shania felt her cheeks heat under Kevin's stare. She'd noticed it too, the way his expression had softened over the past few days, the way the lines of stress and grief around his eyes had begun to ease. "I think having Miss Fontaine here makes Daddy happy," Eloise continued innocently, "just like it makes me happy. We should ask her to stay forever, Daddy." "Eloise," Kevin's voice was gentle but firm, "Miss Fontaine has her own life, her own home. She can't stay here forever." "But why not?" Eloise's face fell. "We have lots of rooms, and she makes the best pancakes, and she knows all the good bedtime stories, and she makes you smile the sunshine way." Shania felt her heart squeeze painfully. This child's need for a maternal figure was so obvious, so heartbreaking in its simplicity. And the way Kevin was looking at her, with a mixture of longing and resignation, made it clear that Eloise wasn't the only one who wanted her to stay. The moment was interrupted by Elias arriving with the morning security briefing, but the conversation lingered in the air between them for the rest of the day. That afternoon, while Eloise napped and Kevin was on a conference call, Shania found herself drawn to his home office. She'd been meaning to ask him about using his printer, but when she reached the doorway, she stopped short. Kevin was standing behind his massive desk, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running. Through his dark hair, in a gesture she'd come to recognize as frustration. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows caught the sharp angles of his face, and Shania felt that familiar flutter in her stomach. "I don't care what the board thinks," Kevin was saying, his voice low and controlled but carrying an edge of steel. "The Fontaine Foundation project moves forward as planned, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me directly." Shania's eyes widened. The Fontaine Foundation? He was naming a foundation after her? Kevin must have sensed her presence because he turned, his eyes meeting hers across the room. Something shifted in his expression, his voice becoming warmer as he wrapped up the call. "We'll discuss this further tomorrow," he said into the phone, never breaking eye contact with Shania. "Right now, I have more important things to attend to." After he hung up, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "The Fontaine Foundation?" Shania asked quietly. Kevin had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "You heard that." "Kevin, you can't name a foundation after me. People will ask questions. They'll assume—" "Let them assume." Kevin moved around his desk, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. "Do you know what I've realized over the past few days, Shania?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I've realized that I don't care what people assume. I don't care about the complications or the timing or any of the 100 reasons this shouldn't be happening." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. "All I care about is how you make me feel, how you make Eloise feel, how right this feels when nothing in my life has felt right for years." Shania's breath caught. "Kevin? I'm falling in love with you," he said simply, and the words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither could uncross. I know it's too soon. I know the circumstances are impossible, but I can't keep pretending otherwise. The confession hit Shania like a physical blow. She'd been fighting her own growing feelings, telling herself this was just proximity and adrenaline and the natural result of being thrown together in intense circumstances. But standing there, looking into Kevin's eyes, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, and watched something fierce and triumphant flash across his face. This time, when Kevin cupped her face in his hands, there was no hesitation, no voice calling from another room. Just the two of them, and the desire that had been building like a slow burn for days. The kiss was deeper this time, more urgent. Kevin's hands tangled in her hair, while Shania's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. She could taste the coffee he'd been drinking, could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both, breathing hard, Kevin rested his forehead against hers. This is dangerous, he murmured, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. Completely dangerous, Shania agreed, but she didn't pull away. We should be focusing on the trial, on keeping me safe. You are safe, Kevin said fiercely. You're safe with me, always. But this, he gestured between them, this isn't about safety. This is about something else entirely. Before Shania could respond, they heard Eloise's voice calling from upstairs, and they reluctantly stepped apart. But the awareness between them had shifted into something new, something that made every casual interaction feel charged with possibility. That evening, as they sat together on the couch reading to Eloise, Shania found herself hyper-aware of every point where Kevin's body touched hers. His thigh pressed against hers, his arm around both her and Eloise, the way his voice rumbled through his chest when he did the dragon voice that made Eloise giggle. This was what family felt like, she realized with a start. This easy intimacy, this sense of belonging, this feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. After Eloise was tucked into bed, Kevin poured them both wine and led Shania out onto the terrace. The city sparkled below them, but all Shania could focus on was the man beside her, the way the moonlight caught the silver at his temples, the way he looked at her like she was something miraculous. Tell me about your wife, she said softly, and watched Kevin's expression grow thoughtful rather than pained. Catherine was safe, he said after a moment. We met in college, dated for years before we got married. She was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, accomplished, from the right family. We had a plan for our life together, and we followed it exactly. Shania sensed there was more to the story. But Kevin was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. But there was never this, he said finally, turning to look at her. This fire, this sense that I might die if I couldn't touch you. With Catherine, love was comfortable, predictable. With you, he trailed off, shaking his head. With me? With you, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and I don't care if I fall. Kevin's voice was rough with emotion. You scare me, Shania. The way you make me feel scares the hell out of me. Shania set down her wineglass and moved closer, her hand finding his cheek. You scare me too, she admitted. I've spent my whole life being careful, being practical, making safe choices. And then you happened, and suddenly I want to throw caution to the wind. What are we going to do about it? Kevin asked, his hand covering hers. I don't know, Shania said honestly, but I know I don't want to waste this, whatever this is. I know I've never felt anything like what I feel when I'm with you and Eloise. Kevin leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, again, they were dark, with an intensity that made Shania's pulse quicken. Stay with me tonight, he said quietly. Not because of safety or security or any practical reason. Stay with me because you want to. Shania's heart hammered against her ribs. They were crossing a line, moving from emotional intimacy into something that would change everything between them. But looking into Kevin's eyes, seeing the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, she knew her answer. Yes, she whispered. Kevin stood slowly, holding out his hand to her. Are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. No pretending this is just about protection or convenience. Shania placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his fingers as they closed around hers. "I'm sure." Kevin led her through the penthouse to his bedroom, and Shania's breath caught at the intimate space. It was unmistakably masculine. Dark wood furniture, deep blue bedding, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. But it was also warm, lived in, with photographs of Eloise on the bedside table and books scattered on the reading chair by the window. "Second thoughts?" Kevin asked softly, noticing her hesitation. "No," Shania said firmly. "No second thoughts." Kevin moved closer, his hands settling on her waist. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice serious. "This isn't just physical for me. I'm not looking for a temporary distraction or a way to pass the time until this situation is resolved." "What are you looking for?" Shania asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. "Forever," Kevin said simply. "I'm looking for forever, Shania. With you, with Eloise. A real family, a real partnership, a real life together." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "Forever is a long time," she said, but her hands were already moving to the buttons of his shirt. "Not long enough," Kevin replied, his own hands finding the zipper of her dress. What followed was a slow, careful exploration of each other, hands mapping new territory, lips discovering sensitive spots, whispered endearments that felt like promises. Kevin touched her like she was something precious, something to be cherished, and Shania found herself responding in ways she never had before. When he laid her back against the soft pillows, the city lights streaming through the windows to paint patterns on their skin, Shania felt like she was exactly where she belonged. "You're beautiful," Kevin murmured against her throat, his hands reverent as they traced the curves of her body. "So are you," she whispered back, marveling at the play of muscle and shadow, the way he seemed to glow in the moonlight. Their coming together was slow and sweet and absolutely perfect, a physical manifestation of the emotional connection that had been building between them for days. Kevin moved over her and within her like he was trying to memorize every moment, every sensation, every soft sound she made. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Kevin's arms wrapped around Shania as she traced lazy patterns on his chest. "No regrets?" he asked softly, his fingers combing through her hair. "None," Shania said firmly, then lifted her head to look at him. "You?" "The only thing I regret is that it took us this long," Kevin replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They talked quietly until the early hours of the morning, sharing stories from their childhoods, dreams for the future, fears and hopes they'd never voiced aloud. As the sun began to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Shania realized that everything had changed between them. She was no longer just a witness under Kevin's protection. She was the woman he loved, the woman who loved him back, the woman who might just become a permanent part of his and Eloise's life. The thought should have been overwhelming. Instead, as Kevin's breathing evened out in sleep and she felt the solid warmth of him beside her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When Shania woke several hours later, she was alone in Kevin's bed, but she could hear voices from downstairs, Kevin's deep rumble and Eloise's excited chatter. Panic fluttered in her chest. What would Eloise think? What would she say? She dressed quickly in the previous day's clothes and made her way downstairs, following the sound of laughter to the kitchen. The scene that greeted her made her heart clench with longing. Kevin stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Eloise sat at the counter, regaling him with a detailed explanation of why purple was the best color in the entire universe. He was smiling, one of those sunshine smiles Eloise had mentioned, and the whole scene looked like something out of a magazine about perfect families. "Miss Fontaine," Eloise spotted her first, bouncing in her seat. "Daddy's making pancakes. He said you were tired and needed extra sleep, but now you're awake and we can eat together." Kevin turned to look at Shania, and the heat in his eyes made her cheeks flush. "Good morning," he said softly, and those two simple words carried the weight of everything that had passed between them the night before. "Good morning," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee he handed her and trying to ignore the way his fingers brushed against hers. "Daddy," Eloise said thoughtfully, "why is Miss Fontaine wearing the same clothes as yesterday?" Both adults froze. Kevin's eyes met Shania's across the kitchen, and she could see him calculating how to handle this delicate situation. Sometimes when people are very tired, they fall asleep in their clothes, Kevin said carefully. Miss Fontaine has been through a lot lately, remember? Eloise nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the easy trust of childhood. Are you feeling better now, Miss Fontaine? Shania looked at Kevin, at this man who had become so important to her so quickly, at the child who had captured her heart from the very first day of school, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Yes, sweetheart, she said softly. I'm feeling much better now. The morning passed in easy domesticity, but underneath the surface, Shania could feel the tension building. Last night had changed everything between them, and they both knew it. The question was what they were going to do about it. The answer came that afternoon, when Detective Balderas called with an update on the case. Carrillo's been arrested, she announced without preamble. We got him on murder charges, plus money laundering and racketeering. The trial's been fast-tracked. We want to get him behind bars before his lawyers can find more ways to muddy the waters. Shania felt a rush of relief mixed with fear. When? 2 weeks, which means you'll be able to go home soon, Miss Fontaine. Resume your normal life. Normal life. The words hit Shania like a bucket of cold water. Her normal life was her small apartment, her classroom full of third graders, her quiet evenings grading papers. Her normal life was safe and predictable and utterly empty compared to what she'd found here with Kevin and Eloise. After the detective hung up, Shania and Kevin sat in his office in silence, both processing what this meant for their relationship. 2 weeks, Kevin said finally. 2 weeks, Shania agreed, then looked at him. Kevin, what happens after the trial? When all this is over and I don't need protection anymore? Kevin was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I suppose that depends on what you want to happen. What do you want to happen? She countered. Kevin stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below. I want you to stay, he said quietly. I want you to marry me and adopt Eloise and become a permanent part of our lives. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of our lives. Shania's breath caught. Kevin, I know it's crazy, he continued, turning back to face her. I know we've only known each other for a week. I know this whole situation is surreal and complicated, and maybe we're both just caught up in the intensity of it all. But I also know that I've never felt anything like what I feel for you. And I know that Eloise lights up like a Christmas tree every time you walk into the room. And I know that for the first time since Catherine died, I can actually picture a future that doesn't feel empty. Shania felt tears prick at her eyes. Everything he was saying resonated deep in her soul, matched feelings she'd been trying to ignore or rationalize away. I love you too, she said softly. And I love Eloise, and the idea of having a real family, a real home with both of you. It's everything I've ever wanted but never thought I could have. But, Shania took a shaky breath, but what if this is just proximity? What if once the danger passes and real life sets in, we realize this was all just adrenaline and circumstance? Kevin crossed the room in 3 quick strides, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. Do you think that's what this is? He asked, his hands framing her face. Do you think last night was just adrenaline? Shania closed her eyes, remembering the tenderness in Kevin's touch, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, the sense of rightness she'd felt lying in his arms. No, she whispered. No, I don't think that's what this is. Neither do I, Kevin said firmly. But if you need time to be sure, if you need space to figure out what you really want. I don't need space, Shania interrupted, opening her eyes to meet his intense gaze. I need you. I need this. I need us. Kevin's smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss her, pouring all of his relief and joy and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Shania felt like she could conquer the world. So what does this mean? She asked. For the next 2 weeks, for the trial, for everything? It means we stop pretending this is temporary, Kevin said firmly. It means we start planning a future together. It means, Daddy! Miss Fontaine! Eloise's voice interrupted them as she bounded into the office. I drew you both a picture. The little girl thrust a piece of construction paper at them, beaming with pride. Shania looked down at the drawing and felt her heart stop. It was a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. 1 tall figure with dark hair labeled Daddy, 1 medium figure with brown skin and curly hair labeled Mommy Shania, and one small figure with pigtails labeled me. "Do you like it?" Eloise asked eagerly. "I drew us as a family, because that's what we are now, right? A real family?" Shania felt tears spill down her cheeks as she knelt down to Eloise's level. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. The most beautiful picture I've ever seen." "Are you crying because you're happy or because you're sad?" Eloise asked with concern, reaching up to touch Shania's cheek. "Happy," Shania managed through her tears. "I'm crying because I'm very, very happy." Eloise beamed and threw her arms around Shania's neck. "I'm happy too. Now I have a mommy and a daddy just like all my friends." Over Eloise's head, Shania met Kevin's eyes and saw her own emotions reflected back at her: love, wonder, gratitude, and the overwhelming sense that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and growing intimacy. Kevin worked from home, claiming he wanted to be nearby in case any new security concerns arose, but really just wanting to spend every possible moment with Shania and Eloise. They fell into routines that felt like they'd been doing them for years: morning coffee together while Eloise got ready for school, afternoon conversations about everything and nothing, evening walks around the private garden on Kevin's terrace, nights spent in each other's arms, learning each other's bodies and hearts with increasing intimacy. Shania had never been happier, but she was also increasingly aware of the approaching trial and what it meant. Soon she would have to face Victor Carrillo in court. She would have to relive the night she'd witnessed a murder, describe every detail for a jury, and hope that her testimony would be enough to put a dangerous man behind bars. The night before the trial, Kevin found her sitting in his library, staring out at the city lights with a book unopened in her lap. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, settling beside her on the window seat. "Too nervous," Shania admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I forget something important or his lawyers make me look unreliable?" Kevin pulled her against his side, his arms wrapping around her securely. "You're going to be amazing," he said firmly. "You're brave and intelligent and honest. The jury will see that." "And after? After the trial is over and Carrillo is hopefully behind bars?" Shania looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her brown eyes. "What happens to us then?" "Then we start our real life together," Kevin said simply. "We get married, we adopt Eloise officially, we build the family we all want so desperately." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Kevin cupped her face gently. "Unless you've changed your mind?" "No," Shania said quickly. "No, I haven't changed my mind. I want all of that. I want it more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." "Then what are you afraid of?" Shania was quiet for a moment, trying to articulate the fear that had been growing in the back of her mind. "I'm afraid that once real life sets in, once the intensity of this situation is over, you'll realize I don't fit in your world. I'm afraid that the differences between us, our backgrounds, our social circles, our lives, will matter more than love." Kevin was quiet for a long moment, and Shania felt her heart sink. Was he having the same doubts? "Do you want to know what I'm afraid of?" he asked finally. Shania nodded. "I'm afraid that you'll realize you're too good for me," Kevin said softly. "I'm afraid you'll wake up one day and remember that you're this incredible woman who transforms lives and shapes young minds and makes the world a better place. And you'll wonder what you're doing with a man who's built his fortune by being ruthless in boardrooms." Shania turned in his arms so she could face him fully. "Kevin Bramwell," she said firmly, "you are not ruthless. You're protective and generous and loving. You've opened your home to me. You've created a foundation to help students like mine. You've made me feel valued and cherished in ways I never thought possible." "And you," Kevin replied, his thumbs tracing across her cheekbones, "are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. You don't need to fit into my world, Shania. You make my world better just by being in it." Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Shania felt centered for the first time in days. "We're really going to do this, aren't we?" she asked. "Get married, become a family, build a life together?" "We're really going to do this," Kevin confirmed. "Are you ready?" Shania thought about everything that had brought her to this moment: the terror of witnessing a murder, the fear of being hunted by a killer, the unexpected sanctuary she'd found in Kevin's arms. Most of all, she thought about Eloise's drawing, the three stick figures holding hands, labeled family. "I'm ready," she said firmly, "for all of it. The trial, the future, forever with you and Eloise." Kevin's smile was radiant as he pulled her closer, and Shania knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. She was no longer just a woman hiding from danger. She was a woman who had found her home, her heart, and her happily ever after in the most unexpected place of all. When love grows in the midst of danger, how do you know if it's real or just circumstances bringing you together? Share your thoughts in the comments about whether Shania should trust her heart or her fears. Chapter 3. The morning of the trial dawned gray and drizzling, matching Shania's mood as she stood before Kevin's bathroom mirror, trying to steady her hands enough to apply lipstick. She'd chosen her most professional outfit, a tailored black suit that Kevin had insisted on having delivered from an upscale boutique, but she still felt exposed, vulnerable. "You look perfect," Kevin's reflection appeared behind hers in the mirror, his hands settling on her shoulders. He was dressed in his own dark suit, looking every inch the powerful businessman, but his eyes were soft with concern. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," Shania admitted, leaning back against his solid warmth. "What if I fall apart up there? What if I can't remember the details clearly enough?" "You won't fall apart," Kevin said firmly, his arms wrapping around her waist. "You're the strongest woman I know, Shania. You've already survived the hardest part, witnessing what you witnessed and choosing to come forward." Shania turned in his arms, looking up into his face. "Will you be there? In the courtroom?" "Every moment," Kevin promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You won't be alone, not for a second." The ride to the courthouse was tense, with Elias and two other security guards flanking their car. Shania held Kevin's hand tightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. When they arrived at the imposing building, she was momentarily overwhelmed by the crowd of reporters and photographers waiting outside. "Miss Fontaine? Miss Fontaine, can you comment on your relationship with Kevin Bramwell?" one reporter shouted. "Is it true you're living in his penthouse?" called another. Kevin's jaw tightened, and he moved protectively in front of Shania as they made their way up the courthouse steps. "No comments," he said curtly to the press. "Miss Fontaine is here to serve justice, nothing more." But Shania could see the speculation in the reporter's eyes, could hear the whispered questions about the elementary school teacher and the billionaire. She pushed down the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Today was about Victor Carrillo and the man he'd killed. Everything else could wait. Inside the courthouse, Detective Balderas met them with a reassuring smile. "You look ready," she told Shania. "Remember, just tell the truth exactly as you remember it. Don't let Carrillo's lawyers intimidate you." The courtroom was packed, and Shania felt her courage waver slightly when she saw Victor Carrillo sitting at the defendant's table. He looked different from the man she'd seen commit murder, clean-shaven, well-dressed, almost respectable. But when his eyes met hers across the room, she saw the cold calculation that had terrified her that night in the parking garage. Kevin squeezed her hand before she was called to the witness stand. "I'm right here," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." Walking to the front of the courtroom felt like the longest journey of Shania's life, but as she settled into the witness chair and placed her hand on the Bible, she felt a strange calm descend over her. This was why she was here. This was her chance to speak for a man who could no longer speak for himself. The prosecutor was gentle but thorough, leading Shania through her testimony step by step. She described her evening at the school, her walk to the parking garage, the shocking moment when she'd witnessed Carrillo plunge a knife into his business partner's chest. "And you're absolutely certain it was the defendant who committed this murder?" the prosecutor asked. "Absolutely certain," Shania replied firmly, looking directly at Carrillo. "I saw his face clearly in the overhead lighting. I heard him speak. There is no doubt in my mind." When Carrillo's defense attorney rose for cross-examination, Shania braced herself. She'd been warned that this would be the difficult part, that they would try to discredit her testimony by attacking her character. "Miss Fontaine," the lawyer began with a condescending smile, "isn't it true that you've been living in Kevin Bramwell's penthouse for the past 2 weeks?" "Objection," the prosecutor called. "Relevance?" "Your Honor, it goes to the witness's credibility and potential bias." the defense attorney replied smoothly. The judge nodded. I'll allow it. Miss Fontaine, please answer the question. Shania lifted her chin. Yes, I've been staying in Mr. Bramwell's home for my protection while waiting for this trial. And isn't it true that Mr. Bramwell is a business rival of my client, that he would benefit financially from seeing Mr. Carrillo imprisoned? I don't know anything about their business relationship, Shania replied honestly. I'm here because I witnessed a murder, not because of any connection to Mr. Bramwell. But you do have a connection to Mr. Bramwell now, don't you? The lawyer pressed. A romantic connection? Shania felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice steady. My personal relationships have no bearing on what I saw that night in the parking garage. Come now, Miss Fontaine. Isn't it convenient that you randomly ended up in the penthouse of your lover? Objection. The prosecutor was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge ruled. Move on, counselor. But the damage was done. Shania could see the jury members exchanging glances, could hear the whispers from the gallery. The defense attorney continued his attack, bringing up her student loan debt, questioning her eyesight, suggesting that she was an unreliable witness who had been coached by Kevin for financial gain. Through it all, Shania held her head high and answered every question truthfully. When she glanced toward the gallery and saw Kevin's encouraging smile, she found the strength to continue. Miss Fontaine, the defense attorney said finally, isn't it possible that in your fear and panic you were mistaken about what you saw? That perhaps the lighting was poor or your view was obstructed? No, Shania said firmly. The lighting was excellent, my view was clear, and I am not mistaken. I saw Victor Carrillo murder that man in cold blood, and no amount of character assassination will change that fact. The courtroom was silent for a moment, and Shania could see that her quiet dignity had made an impression on the jury. When she was finally dismissed from the witness stand, Shania felt drained, but proud. She had done her job. She had spoken truth to power, regardless of the personal cost. Kevin was waiting for her in the hallway outside the courtroom, and the moment she saw his face, she knew everything was going to be okay. You were incredible, he said, pulling her into his arms despite the cameras flashing around them. Absolutely incredible. I think I might have hurt the case, Shania said worriedly. The jury looked skeptical when they brought up our relationship. The jury looked impressed by your honesty and courage, Kevin corrected, and even if some of them have questions about us, they can't argue with the facts of what you witnessed. The trial continued for 3 more days, with expert witnesses and forensic evidence supporting Shania's testimony. Throughout it all, Kevin was a constant presence, attending every session, holding her hand during difficult moments, reminding her that she wasn't facing this alone. On the final day, as they waited for the jury's verdict, Shania found herself pacing nervously in the courthouse hallway. What if they don't believe me? She asked Kevin for the 10th time. What if Carrillo walks free because of the questions about us? Then we'll deal with whatever comes next, Kevin said calmly. But, Shania, regardless of what happens in there, I need you to know something. What? Kevin pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Shania's breath caught in her throat. I need you to know that I'm not asking you to marry me because of this trial or this situation or anything that's happened over the past 2 weeks. Kevin, I'm asking you to marry me because I love you, he continued, dropping to one knee right there in the courthouse hallway as reporters and bystanders stopped to stare. Because you make me a better man, a better father, a better human being. Because Eloise needs you and I need you, and we want to build a life with you that has nothing to do with murder trials or protection or convenience. Shania felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked down at the ring, a stunning solitaire that caught the light and threw rainbows across the marble floor. Shania Fontaine, Kevin said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet hallway. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air for a moment, and Shania was acutely aware of all the eyes watching them, all the cameras recording this moment. This was her chance to step back, to choose the safe path, to keep her private life private. Instead, she thought about Eloise's drawing of their stick figure family, about the way Kevin had held her through her nightmares, about the future they could build together. Yes, she said clearly, her voice ringing through the hallway. Yes, I'll marry you. The crowd around them broke into spontaneous applause as Kevin slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her deeply. Flashbulbs went off, but Shania didn't care. She was exactly where she belonged. Miss Fontaine? Detective Balderas appeared beside them with a huge grin. The jury's reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, Shania held Kevin's hand tightly as the jury foreman stood to deliver their decision. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Victor Carrillo, guilty. The courtroom erupted in noise. Cheers from the victim's family, shouted questions from reporters, the sound of Carrillo's chair scraping against the floor as he was led away in handcuffs. Through it all, Shania felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. It was over. Carrillo would spend the rest of his life in prison, and she was finally free to move forward with her new life. Outside the courthouse, as reporters shouted questions about the engagement and their whirlwind romance, Kevin wrapped his arm around Shania's waist and faced the cameras. Miss Fontaine showed incredible courage in testifying against a dangerous man, he said clearly. Her bravery helped ensure that justice was served today. As for our personal relationship, I'm proud to say that she's agreed to become my wife. We're looking forward to building a future together as a family. Miss Fontaine, one reporter called out, how does it feel to go from elementary school, teacher to billionaire's fiancé? Shania stepped forward, her voice calm and confident. It feels like I'm the luckiest woman in the world, she said simply. Not because of money or status, but because I've found a man who sees me for who I really am and loves me for it. A man who shares my values and my commitment to making the world a better place. And what about your teaching career? Another reporter asked. I'll be returning to my classroom as soon as possible, Shania replied firmly. My students are the most important thing in my professional life, and I can't wait to get back to them. The drive home to Kevin's penthouse was quiet, both of them processing the events of the day. When they walked through the front door, they were greeted by an excited Eloise, who launched herself at Shania with a squeal of joy. Miss Fontaine, Renata told me you and Daddy are getting married. Is it true? Are you really going to be my mommy? Shania knelt down to Eloise's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. Yes, sweetheart. If that's what you want, I would love to be your mommy. Eloise's face lit up like sunrise. It's what I want more than anything in the whole world. She threw her arms around Shania's neck, holding on tight. I told everyone at school that you were perfect mommy material, and now it's really happening. Over Eloise's head, Shania met Kevin's eyes and saw her own joy reflected back at her. This was it. This was their moment of becoming a real family. Can I see your ring? Eloise asked excitedly, and Shania held out her hand so the little girl could examine the sparkling diamond. It's so pretty. Can I help plan the wedding? Can I be the flower girl? Can I help pick your dress? Slow down, princess, Kevin laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. We'll have plenty of time to plan everything together. That evening, after Eloise was tucked into bed with promises of wedding planning sessions and dress shopping trips, Kevin and Shania sat together on their terrace, looking out at the city that had brought them together in the most unexpected way. No regrets? Kevin asked, his arm tightening around her as she snuggled closer. Only one, Shania said, and Kevin tensed slightly. I regret that we can't get married tomorrow. I don't want to wait. Kevin's laugh was rich with relief and joy. Well, we could always elope to Vegas, he suggested playfully, and deprive Eloise of her chance to be the most beautiful flower girl in history? I don't think so. Shania tilted her head up to look at him. Besides, I want the whole world to see me marry you. I want everyone to know that the elementary school teacher from the wrong side of town landed the most amazing man on the planet. You didn't land me, Kevin corrected softly, his lips brushing against her temple. You saved me. Both of us, Eloise and me. We were just existing before you came into our lives. Now, we're living. 6 months later, Shania stood in the Ani, bridal suite of the city's most exclusive hotel, staring at herself in a full-length mirror. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, fitted perfectly to her curves and flowing into a train that seemed to go on forever. But it wasn't the dress that made her glow. It was the happiness that radiated from within. You look like a princess, Eloise breathed, resplendent in her own flower girl dress of pale pink silk. The most beautiful princess in the whole world. You look pretty amazing yourself, sweetheart, Shania replied, adjusting Eloise's flower crown with gentle hands. Over the past 6 months, their bond had deepened even further. Eloise had started calling her Mom naturally, without prompting, and the adoption papers had been filed just last week. Renata appeared in the doorway, tears in her eyes. "It's time," she announced. "Mr. Kevin is waiting for you, and he looks like he might pass out from nerves." Shania laughed, her own nerves fluttering. "How do I look? Really?" "Like a woman about to marry the love of her life," Renata said warmly. "Like someone who belongs exactly where she's going." The ceremony was held in the hotel's rooftop garden, with the city skyline providing a dramatic backdrop. As Shania walked down the aisle, she saw faces she'd come to know and love over the past months. Kevin's business associates, who had welcomed her warmly, her fellow teachers, who had cheered when she announced her engagement, and Detective Balderas, who had become an unexpected friend. But all of that faded away when she saw Kevin waiting for her at the altar. He was devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. Wonder, love, and gratitude all mixed together. When her hand slipped into his, everything felt right with the world. "You're beautiful," he whispered as they faced each other before the minister. "So are you," she whispered back, and meant it. The ceremony was traditional but personal, with vows they had written themselves. When Kevin spoke about how Shania had brought light back into his life, how she had shown him that love could be both safe and exhilarating, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When Shania promised to love not just Kevin, but Eloise as well, to be a mother and partner and best friend for the rest of their lives, Kevin had to wipe away tears of his own. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with thunderous applause and the sound of Eloise cheering, "That's my mommy and daddy." The reception was magical, held in the hotel's ballroom, with flowers and fairy lights creating an enchanted atmosphere. But for Shania, the most perfect moment came during their first dance, when she was swaying in Kevin's arms to their song, a romantic ballad about finding unexpected love. "Mrs. Bramwell," Kevin murmured against her ear, and she shivered at the sound of her new name. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," Shania replied honestly. "Like everything I never knew I was missing." "Even with all the cameras and reporters outside?" Kevin asked with a slight smile. Their relationship had been tabloid fodder for months, with headlines ranging from "Teacher Bags Billionaire" to modern-day Cinderella story. "Especially with all the cameras and reporters outside," Shania said firmly. "Let them write whatever they want. I know the truth, that I'm the luckiest woman alive because I get to spend the rest of my life with you and Eloise." As if summoned by her words, Eloise appeared beside them on the dance floor, her flower crown slightly askew from all her celebrating. "Can I dance too?" she asked, and without waiting for an answer, she squeezed between her parents, wrapping her small arms around both their waists. As they swayed together, the three of them, a real family at last, Shania felt tears of pure joy slide down her cheeks. A year ago, she never could have imagined this life. The murder she'd witnessed had been traumatic and terrifying, but it had also led her to everything she'd ever wanted. "I love you both so much," she whispered, and felt Kevin's arms tighten around them both. "We love you too, Mom," Eloise said seriously, using the word that still made Shania's heart flutter every time she heard it. 1 year later, Shania stood in the doorway of her classroom, watching her third graders work on their writing assignments. She was back where she belonged, doing the work she loved, but everything was different now. The Bramwell Foundation, no longer called the Fontaine Foundation, much to her relief, had provided her school with new computers, updated textbooks, and funding for after-school programs. She was able to give her students opportunities she never could have provided before. But more than that, she was able to go home every day to a family that loved her completely. Kevin had been true to his word about supporting her career. He'd never once asked her to quit teaching or suggested that she didn't need to work. He understood that her students were part of who she was, just as his business was part of who he was. Mrs. Bramwell, one of her students, a shy little girl named Maria, approached her desk. "Can you help me with my story?" "Of course, sweetie. What are you writing about?" "I'm writing about how sometimes the scariest things can lead to the best things," Maria explained earnestly. Like when my family moved here from Mexico. I was really scared. But then I met you and all my friends, and now I love it here. Shania felt her heart squeeze with emotion. That sounds like a wonderful story, Maria. Sometimes life does surprise us that way, doesn't it? As she helped Maria with her writing, Shania reflected on the truth of those words. A year and a half ago, witnessing a murder had been the most terrifying experience of her life, but it had also led her to Kevin and Eloise, to a love she never could have imagined, to a family that completed her in ways she hadn't known she was incomplete. That evening, as she walked through the front door of the penthouse that was now truly her home, she was greeted by the sound of laughter from the kitchen. Kevin and Eloise were attempting to make dinner together, with predictably chaotic results. "Mom!" Eloise called out when she saw her. "We're making spaghetti, but Daddy keeps dropping the noodles." "It's not my fault they're slippery," Kevin protested, but he was grinning as he said it. He looked younger these days, more relaxed, as if the constant tension he'd carried for years had finally eased. "Let me help," Shania laughed, wrapping her arms around both of them, "before you burn down the kitchen." As they cooked together, really together as the family unit they'd become, Shania marveled at how normal it all felt now, how right, how perfectly, completely hers. Later that night, after Eloise was asleep and she and Kevin were curled up together in their bed, Kevin traced patterns on her bare shoulder with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Impossibly happy," Shania replied, turning to face him in the dim light. "You?" "Happier than I ever thought I deserved to be," Kevin admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Every morning I wake up and can't believe this is my life, that you're my wife, that Eloise has the mother she always wanted, that we're actually doing this." "We're actually doing this," Shania confirmed, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted like promise and forever. Outside their windows, the city sparkled with lights, the same city where they'd first met in circumstances neither of them would have chosen. But as they held each other in the darkness, both knew that they wouldn't change a single moment of their story. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unexpected circumstances. Sometimes running from danger leads you straight to your destiny. And sometimes, when you think your life is falling apart, it's actually falling into place exactly as it was meant to. Shania had learned that love doesn't always arrive when you're ready for it, or in the package you expect, or through the circumstances you would choose. But when it's real, when it's the kind of love that transforms not just your heart, but your entire existence, it's worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. She was no longer just Shania Fontaine, the elementary school teacher who worked hard and kept her head down and played it safe. She was Shania Bramwell, beloved wife and mother, woman who had found her courage in the darkest moment and discovered that sometimes the scariest situations lead to the most beautiful outcomes. As sleep began to claim her, wrapped safely in Kevin's arms with their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, Shania smiled into the darkness. Their love story had begun with blood and fear and a desperate elevator ride to nowhere. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even in the darkest moments, love could find a way to bloom. And they lived, as all the best love stories promise, happily ever after. Have you ever found unexpected love in the midst of life's chaos? How did you know it was real and worth fighting for? Share your stories of love that transcended circumstances in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for another Dear Love Diaries story. Your comments and support mean everything to me. If Kevin and Shania's love story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more passionate tales of love conquering all. Until tomorrow, remember that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are reached through the most unexpected journeys.